Hi everyone, my name is Win Worrell and I'm from Software Toolbox. I will be filling in for Jose Rivera, who is on CSIA Travel. Thanks for attending the February CSIA webinar. Today's webinar will provide you with Best Practices and Benchmarks Section 5, Project Management, by Jeff Miller, the Director of Project Management at Interstates Control Systems. Better project management systems and practices provide a high return on investment to the integrator and higher value to their clients. This webinar is part of the efforts at CSIA to promote and provide training around best practices. For 2016, we plan to broadcast monthly webinars on best practices. These webinars will be delivered by members whose companies have received our certification on multiple rounds, as is the case with Interstates Control Systems. In addition, we are providing for-fee supplemental training. An extensive project management remote leaning course is offered for a March 8th start. The cost is $1,500 for CSI members and $1,765 for non-members. The training is delivered remotely in a joint effort with ISA, so attendees do not have to travel for this. We'll get started here in a second, and once we do, be sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box. Questions will be answered during the event, so be sure to ask them. The webinar will also be archived so you can view it later, as well as the slide deck will be available. Now, before I get started, we have a word from our sponsor. The sponsor of today's webinar is Software Toolbox, a CSI partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but you're investing in a relationship where you depend on your suppliers to be there every step of the way. Software Toolbox has been around and seen the CSIA Best Practices grow to be the great tool that they are today. In Software Toolbox's recommendations of best practices, it's best to think carefully before writing custom code and only do so when no other solution is available. Custom one-off applications are filled with risk and hidden cost, and when you evaluate that over the 10-year automation lifecycle. Software Toolbox's highly configurable, off-the-shelf products and support services are proven to lower system integrators' risks. This month, they are highlighting the Cogent Data Hub. Just like the human brain, Cogent Data Hub provides a multi-purpose nerve center, transforming process data into usable information. An intuitive interface connects multiple sources into accessible, secure formats. Thousands of installations has proven its bulletproof design. The adaptability of Cogent Data Hub never fails to impress. You can learn more at softwaretoolbox.com/Cogent Data Hub. Now I'd like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Jeff Miller, Director of Project Management at Interstate Control Systems. Interstate has received the CSIA Certification 5 consecutive times and is an active member of CSIA. Jeff is a member of the CSIA board and the current treasurer. So without further delay, here's Jeff Miller.
All right, thank you. Well, I want to welcome you to our presentation today and just give you a little bit of a background on what we're planning to do. Just this entire Best Practices webinar series, what we're really shooting to do is give you a little bit of information around what's best practices all about, where do I get the most value from best practices, and how do I get to that value? Why would I even want to consider approaching best practices? So we're going to look at some insights into specific focus areas that you may want to prepare to look at. And we're going to talk all along as you have different presenters. They'll be talking about lessons learned as they've implemented that section. Today we're looking at project management, but we'll actually be doing a webinar on each of the sections of best practices. And I think the next one that's actually going to come up is just why would you want to implement best practices into your business? What's the purpose and what value do integrators see in certification? So I'd encourage you to come to that one as well. I think you'll get a lot of very good information. Today we're going to look at, this is kind of our agenda for today, what is project management? How should I approach this section to obtain really when I looked at best practices, how do I get the most bang for my buck? And I'll also give you, just a little insight as to what are the auditors really looking for? How do I document things that they're going to be needing to see if I do decide to become a certified integrator? And then what are some lessons learned from that interstates, in this case, have learned from implementing the project management section into our processes? So I think you'll find you'll get some very helpful information out of today, and feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat box as we go, and I'll be watching that and hope to be able to answer them as we go. But I will also have a Q&A session at the very end. So what is project management? I always like to look at what does the Project Management Institute say about it. So this is their definition. It's the application of knowledge and skills, tools and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. And you'll see that the CSIA definition is actually very similar. Application of specific processes and disciplines to help ensure a project meets stated objectives in terms of scope, performance, time, and cost. And if you really look at where do you get your value here, it's really in that last piece, meeting objectives, those objectives being scope, performance, time, and cost. And that's what our customers are hiring us to do, and why they really want us to have a good project management system in place to be able to deliver their project. So these are the areas, and there's no sense in me going through these. We're actually going to hit all of these in just kind of, this is what's included in Best Practices Section 5. And I think if any of you have worked with the Project Management Institute, you'll see that a lot of this falls directly in line with their modules, their knowledge areas inside Best Practices, or inside PMBOK, their project management body of knowledge. So we're going to look at a lot of these. What I'll really focus on at first is, and one of the things that I told you I would mention is, what are, how should I really start to approach Section 5? What's my first step? So if I'm going to implement any section in best practices, the best bet by far is to read through the entire section and look for those kind of core concepts. What are the things that you see in there that yeah, I probably need to make sure I'm doing that. And in this case, a lot of it is around contracts and a project plan and a resource plan, a quality plan. Those are things you'll hear a lot of in this section. You'll see those in lots of different places. So you start looking for those core concepts. And once you've seen the core concepts, now you go back through the section and really start to take note of what are the items that the CSIA Best Practices team felt like were the most important to audit on. So I do want to encourage you, though, it's not it isn't just do the things that are in the sections that have a magnifying glass next to them that are auditable. You won't get as much value out of the section if that's all you focus on are those things. In fact, I'll even tell you that in some cases you can't pass an audited section without doing something from a previous section, and I'll show you a couple of those in the PM one. But something to be aware of is that the PM section is a must-pass section if you are going through the certification audit. There are actually 4 must-pass sections, and this is one of those. And we'll be showing you of the other 4. We'll show you those, or other 3. We'll show you those as well. The reason it's must-pass is that this is one of those things that our clients see the most value in. The second reason is this is one that is a high-value target for your business. If you do well at it, you are going to deliver better projects. And you're going to make more gross profit on your projects, which means more net income to your bottom line. So that's another reason why as a company, when we began the process of preparing for an audit and implementing best practices, for me it was nothing about what's my customers asking for. It was all about, I need to improve my business, and this is a way to do that. And I found a tremendous amount of value. And again, we've been audited 5 times and passed all 5, and I still get value out of going through that process. So one other thing that I do want to point you to, and this slide deck will be posted out for you to look at, as well as you'll have the recording. But inside here, I've got a hyperlink to a section in the connected community for those of you that are members of CSIA. This is a section that has not only templates and tools that you can use, but it has this, what I call audit prep tool. And the audit prep tool is one that that is definitely, it just makes your job easier when you're preparing for the audit. One question did come up while I was speaking there. Will the audit focus areas change with the new revision of CSIA Best Practices? So just so you all are aware, we are working on revision 5. We're currently on revision 4 of the Best Practices Manual. At the annual conference, we'll be talking more about Rev 5. We'll be looking for some that have already been audited on either Rev 3 or Rev 4 to take on a pilot audit for Rev 5 when they're coming up for their audits, and then that one will be released. But the focus areas, the 4 sections that are must pass, will not change in Rev 5. They're going to stay the same. So good question. Thank you for asking that. So now I just threw, you can't hardly see this, I'm sure, but I just wanted to throw a little piece on there that this is out of that prep tool. So one of the things that I like to do with the prep tool is these will show just the audited items, and I always like to list who's my responsible person for making sure we pass that section of the audit, what's my supporting evidence for that, where's the documents located, is it complete, and when was it complete, and if there's any action required, some notes section on there. This is the entire document, and there will be one built for Rev 5 that'll be exactly like this, so that's something to consider. The other thing that as I prepare for the audit or have my team, we'll actually create a directory structure that basically, as I'm going through the audit, I want to have a place I can go to just pull those satisfying documents, things that I'm going to use to show the auditor that I meet the goals of that section. So one of the things that you'll find, it's like a day-and-a-half process, maybe the first time even getting closer to 2 days. So the better prepared you are for showing that information, the easier it is to pass, and the easier it is to get through it in a day-and-a-half versus 2 days. So this is it's a big deal. One of the things is just where things are at. Even if it's just a hyperlink to a job folder inside this Section 1 documents. So that's something that I found to be very valuable, and I do it on every audit. So I just started thinking about what are the things that I found to be the most valuable when I was implementing Section 5 into our processes. And I'll be 100% honest. When we began the process, I had only been working for Interstates for about 6 months when realized that we needed to do something. And we had very little of the information in an SOP or standard operating procedure form. So we had a lot of work to do. But these I found to be very useful from the standpoint of these are going to be the highest impact to your bottom line on your project if you do well at it. And I'm going to focus, I'm going to actually hit all of them, but some of these will get a little bit more focus. But contract management, having a project plan, good risk management, good scope management and budget management, quality, and then really this last one, closure, making sure you capture your lessons learned and you're applying those to future projects. If you don't do well at that, you're going to relearn some of these lessons over and over again, and that's obviously a negative impact to your bottom line. So from here, I'm actually going to start going into what does best practices say about each of these sections, and then I'll give you some hints about where I think you should focus in those areas, just to give you a better, kind of a good place to go. So for contract management, what we're really after is, does the integrator know, do they have a good contract review process? It's not just that we sign a contract. Do you understand what you're signing? Do you have a process in place to review and approve signing of contracts? Do you know who of your company is qualified to sign that document? Have you established that policy of who can sign? So I know when we started this was pretty loosey-goosey and didn't have a lot of formal review going on, and we saw a tremendous amount of value in implementing a formal process here. But what I wanted to show is, why is this critical? You need to really understand what you're signing. And I've had, just in the last 2 years, I've had customers tell me, if you won't sign this, I'll find another integrator that will. Well, that really kind of scares me, because the contract provisions that I would not sign could have potentially, if the job went upside down, could sink the company. And it's scary to think that there are people out there that will sign a contract like that. So you really need to have a way to understand that. And I'll just throw a plug in right now. One of the things you'll hear at our annual conference this year is we'll actually have a new legal type plan that you can engage the legal firm that CSIA has endorsed that really knows a lot about systems integration work, and they're going to have things like, they'll just do a contract review for you. So if you don't have the staff that's good at that and you're concerned about some things, use that, and it's going to be on a, you can either contract them by the piece that you want them to look at. You can do some monthly contracts. You'll get a lot more information on that, but this will be something that I think will be a big impact, especially for integrators that don't have that ability in-house today or don't have an expert at it. I continue to look at contract provisions, and when I look at them, I'm thinking about what's really putting my company at risk. And there really are some contract clauses, and those are the big ones that we just absolutely won't sign that contract if they will not budge on it. But are you really willing to take on that much risk? Most of us think nothing will go bad wrong on a project, but we all know on occasion things go bad wrong, and we've got potentials of really having some issues when it comes to the contract and what it might cost us. I talked about this a little bit already, but large clients in particular have on-staff lawyers, maybe multiples of them, and they take their risk very seriously, and they want you to take on all the risk. And that's some of the biggest ones that I've seen lately. They basically said that you're going to take this risk on, or we'll find somebody that will. And that's pretty scary, because they were contract provisions that really could hurt you. And then you need to, as a business, just decide what are your walkaway terms and conditions, and then stick to them. It's the hardest thing in the world to stick to those when you need work, and you're thinking, man, I'm putting myself at a little bit of risk here, or maybe a lot of risk, but I need the work. You really got to decide which ones are those I can't budge on terms and conditions, and then stick to them. And that's been for us, that's been something that's really helped us in the long term. Many times the client has come back to us after they realize nobody else is going to sign it either, and they come back and say, well, we really want you to do the work, and I guess we will negotiate. So another thing that's part of that, though, is subcontracting. And you, as an integrator, some of us don't do a lot of subcontracting, but on occasion you may have to hire a subcontractor. It could just be, I need somebody to terminate my Ethernet cables or my fiber. I might need to hire a specialty into my team. I don't have that skill set, so I need to hire a subcontractor to come in and help me on this. So, you know, do you have a process for your subcontractors? Do you have something there? And this is Best Practices pushes this. Do you ensure that your key contract conditions have passed down to the subcontractor? And that's, you know, you need to have a subcontract document in place that lays those things out. Sometimes you just reference them in your subcontract and you give them a copy of your contract so they can read through them, but they need to know what they're signing up for as well. And then does it include their appropriate items, scope, specifications, things that you're going to make them apply, do for you? Do you have the proper standards in place to tell them, here's how I anticipate you doing it, and whatever terms and conditions you're wanting them to apply or have in their systems? And then, do you have certificates of insurance from your subs? One of the things, and the reason this is key is, you know, if you're stuck to certain contract provisions and one of your subs causes an issue, the customer doesn't care if it was one of your subs that did it, they're coming to you. So if you've got a contract clause that you did not pass down to your subcontractor, the chances of you being stuck with the bag are really high, and especially if you didn't get an insurance certificate from that person to prove that they could cover some of the costs associated with fighting that battle. And, you know, oftentimes, you know, you're in the heat of the battle, you need this person right now, and, well, they don't have it. It's going to cost me $10 an hour more if I have them get a certificate of insurance. Well, the problem is, if they're the problem, your insurance may not cover that problem. So you need to make sure that you've worked through that with them, and they have appropriate limits as well. So that's something that, as you get audited, it is something that the auditor will be looking for. Project plan is another big item, and this is one of those sections where if you go to the actual items that you're being audited on, creating a project plan isn't one of the questions that they'll ask you. What they'll ask you is, after you've created your project plan, how do you get it approved by your customer, and do you show it to your team? So what I found is, you know, these first two items here, do you develop a plan and do you have a template? If you have those two in place, it's going to be easy to pass this section. If you don't, and everybody's kind of just playing off their own song sheet, you're likely not going to pass this section. And project plan gets referenced throughout project management through all of these other sections. They're going to talk about the project plan. So if you don't have one, you're going to run into some snags. Now, earlier I told you about library items out on the Connected Community that have some templates. There's actually a template project plan out there that if you're wondering what would that look like, there's a template out there that you can go to. And and like I say, that link that I put in the PowerPoint presentation will take you to the Connected Community library items that would show you that. All right, so, but really, do you share the project plan with the team, with the client? Do you get approvals on things like your methodology, how you're planning to deliver? Because really your project plan, part of it shows your delivery, how I'm planning to deliver to the client. So are you getting the appropriate approvals for that? One thing you will find if you're getting audited is you're going to hear them talk about approvals quite frequently. If you go through the sections inside Best Practices, they're going to talk about formal approvals. They're going to want to see whether it's an email or it's an actual signed document that said, yes, I had my project plan approved by the client, and here's a copy of it. And they may ask to see it in multiple projects just to see that you know where they're found and that you store them in the same locations all the time. So you know, they're going to look at things like if your project plan says you're going to do communications in a certain way, they would ask you, can you show me that you're following your plan? And you'll need to pull up a project plan, you'll need to pull up your communication plan, pull up some communications for that project. Are there sign-offs being documented? Are they in the right spot where you said they would be? Can you find them easily? And I know my first couple of audits, I really struggled with that, finding things in a hurry. And now what I do, and this is something I'll encourage all of you to do, bring your project manager into the audit for this section. Let them go find their documents, because they can go into any of their projects and tell you exactly where they're at. It just makes things go smoother. Let them help you prepare for this section in the audit. And if things are changing, are you changing the plan? And some people would say my project plan should never change. Well, the problem with that is there are things that change in your project plan along the way, just like your schedule and everything else. It still is an item that's going to change. So the key to this section, have a plan, follow your plan. They're going to be asking you for proof for everything that's part of your project plan. Can you show me where you're doing that? And that's consistent throughout every section in best practices. You'll be asked to prove that you're doing that, just like an ISO audit or something like that. So risk management, this is a key one in my mind, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but do you have a formal process for managing risks? Do you identify risk? And this, again, if you looked at the PMBOK Project Management Body of Knowledge Manual, you'll see a lot of similarities between what CSIA requires and what PMBOK says is appropriate to do for these sections. This being one of those cases, risk ID, quantification, having owners assigned, and having risk response documented. And can you show evidence that you're following that process? So here's the reason I say that this is such a big deal. And I see a project manager is really they're probably two of their main functions and two of the biggest pieces that they play as being a communications manager and a risk manager. But the problem with it is that most of us suck at doing this. And the reason we suck at it is most of the time we feel like that as a PM, I have no control over risk. And so when somebody brings up a risk, I just blank out and I think I have no way I can fix that. So we're just going to put our heads down and try to not come across that. Well, that just doesn't work. And so one of the keys that I have found for risk management is get them to think differently. And I did a presentation on risk management at the annual conference a year or so ago, and did a webinar on this, and I'm sure you can still pull up the webinar. But just specific to how do you identify risk drivers versus what we typically think as risk. And just a basic about that is, I'll just give you an example. Schedule slippage. Many times that's the risk that pops up. And so, well, what's really driving the schedule slippage? Well, it might be that John Doe isn't going to be available to start on my project for 3 weeks until 3 weeks later. Well, that's something I can act on, because maybe I don't need John Doe. Maybe I can use Jane. Or, you know, my schedule might slip because I don't have a issued for construction set of P&IDs. Well, maybe there's a few things that I can do ahead of that, move them out of order from what they normally would get done, but while I'm waiting on for construction P&IDs, that I'm still working off my critical path. So that's what I think of are the drivers. What's driving the risk, not what's the risk itself, because most of us think the schedule slip is the risk. But really, when you start drilling down into what's causing it, you can act on that. So that's all I'll do on this particular one for today, but just think differently. That's the big thing for risk. So the next section in best practices for PM is resource management. You need a formal management process, and this is going to look so different for, you know, a small integrator, medium-sized integrator, and a large integrator. You will have different processes. The smaller you are, the easier it is to do it with an Excel spreadsheet. The larger you get, the harder that is, because now your team members are spread across lots of different projects, and how do you know that they're not overbooked? And so it gets to be more complicated, but do you, as an integrator, whatever your size, have a formal process for that? And can you account for their availability throughout the project? So they're going to want to know, how do you know that John Doe really can do your work for you? How do you plan that? How do you look at it month to month, week to week? So they're going to want to see some tools that you use for that. Do you ensure the resources have the appropriate skills? This is one that has caught my PM team off guard so many times, because my team today in particular is not technical. They're PMs that's their job. They just do project management, and they do it very well. But they're not necessarily going to realize that the technical people that got assigned don't have the skills to do the work. So they got to ask more questions. So do they have the training? Do we look at resource loading and other things that might take them away from that, like overhead work that they have to do? And are we identifying resource risk in our risk management plan? So all these things are things that you're going to get questioned on if you're going through an audit, that they're going to want to see, what am I doing to provide that? So one of the things that is key, that I think if what we pulled out of this, the little nuggets that saved our butts in a lot of areas, were, if I find out that the resource doesn't have the appropriate skills, I either find a resource that does have them, and I talk to my division manager or whoever the resource leader is, and or I insist that they get the proper training before I allow them on that project. Now, the smaller you are, the more you're going to know this. The larger you are, you're going to have resources that are new to your team. You may not have ever had them on your team before. So as the project manager, though, you're the guy responsible. And then the other piece is, make sure you're asking about all this other project and overhead work assigned. If you don't have a tool, we use Microsoft Project Server to give us visibility across all projects, and we put overhead projects out there as well so we can see overhead work. But if you don't have a tool like that, you need to be talking to their supervisors and find out what other work do they have on their plate. If I can't book them 100%, I need to know that that's the case, and that what's their work that they're working on. Is it more important than the project work right now? All right, communication management, I mentioned this earlier as well. This is a key area. If you had to distill down project management to the few things that, if I could do these well, I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck, communications management is another one of those. And it's really not necessarily associated with the plan. It's, are you doing what you said you were going to do? Am I getting reports out to the people that I should be getting them out to, or am I just sending them out willy-nilly and not at the right times? So do you have a communications plan? Do you have evidence that you're following the plan? So again, they're going to want to know, if you say you're going to send weekly emails on status reports, that's the way you said you're going to send it out. Show me some emails where you sent out a project status report. So that's things you're going to have to produce for them to prove that. Do you have templates? This is huge, and I think most of us do well at this, but what you're really after is, you know, how can I make it easier for the project manager so that I can ensure that it gets done the same way every time? So if you have good templates, in this case it's a communication plan template, it's easy for the project manager to fill it out. You can have a lot of the stuff already pre-filled out for them. All they got to do is do their project-specific stuff in it. So it makes it easy to pass this section in the audit, but it also makes the project manager think about, what things should I be sending status reports on or things out to the group. So really the keys that I found here, having good templates for all forms of communications. So if I've got a weekly meeting agenda template and the notes section that goes out, that's what I'm after. I want a template that works for most projects, and you may have to have several templates for different style projects. But then the second piece is make sure those communications are getting stored in the same place for all projects, not in the same location for all projects, but in the spot that you said you were going to put them. So if you've got in your, if you're having the PM create directories or folders inside their email where they store their communications and then later archive them and put them on the server, that's what you're really, that's kind of part of it. The other piece is if you're going to do a formal report, where does that PDF of that formal report actually reside? Is it on a SharePoint site? Is it wherever? Is it wherever you said you're going to locate it? Is it there? Because they're going to want to say, where do you say that this is at, and can you show me it's there? Scope management is another big, we obviously, our company gets everything from a paper napkin, design to, just they've got a general concept to a fully designed system. And how do you know what your real scope is here? We bid a lot of projects, design, build, and sometimes the scope's not fully defined, so we have to define it. So what's your process for that? We know we do a lot of this work that we have to define it better up front, what we've bid. And so some of that happens at proposal phase, but once the project gets started, the PM has more work to do. So do you have a clear scope statement? Do you talk about it with the team, and is it approved by the client? You may be pulling stuff out of the proposal, but it's different than the proposal. You need to distill it down to what's the customer, what's the picture in the customer's head that we're delivering, and can I say that in a statement and get that approved by the client so that we're all on the same page? And it may be multiple pages of documents that have to get done. Once you're into the process of developing your scope, do I have a way to identify scope gaps? Every time you propose something, I will guarantee you there are scope gaps, things the customer thought he got with your proposal, things that you didn't, and if you don't have exclusions, he gets them. If for the most part, you might get some clients that's not the case, but what's your process for identifying scope gaps, and how do you build that back into the system so that you can get paid for them if they really were either things that they forgot to tell you about or things that you found that there's no way you could have known? Do you have a process for verifying scope, your deliverables, how you're going to prove that you meet the client's expectations, and do you have a formal work acceptance process? And I think this is the thing that I found that's key in here. Make sure you've got your scope documented well and signed off by the client. This is after you've had a chance to start pouring through the proposal document. If you weren't the guy who wrote the proposal, you go through there and you document it in, we will call it might be a functional requirement specification. Most of the time we don't get those from our clients, so we'll build one, send it back to the client and say, is this really what you thought you got? This is what we thought we were giving you, and then we negotiate, if there's things that they don't feel were part of it or weren't part of it, but get that signed off. They're going to want to see, the auditors want to see your sign-offs, either, an email back that says, yes, I agree with that, or a physical signed document that you've scanned and put in your job folder, or have the paper copy that you can show them. The other piece of this is really be thinking about, when you're doing scope management, you should be thinking about, how am I going to prove that what I am delivering meets your specification, what you thought you were getting, all these identified scope items. Build a test plan before the testing begins and get your customer to sign off on the test plan. So that's really a good way, another way to actually identify some potential scope gaps. If you start this early enough, building your test plan, you're looking at requirements and making sure you're testing those requirements. So that was a big one that I remember us having to figure out the hard way. Something I would definitely say is key to scope management. So project schedule management, do you build a schedule? This does not have to be a Microsoft project schedule or a, you know, whatever, any other brand, a Primavera, any of those other scheduling tools. It could be an Excel spreadsheet that you use to keep track of your deliverables and the timelines you have to deliver them. But some way you need to know you can deliver this project in the time frame, and they're going to want to see some form of a schedule. Are you managing your work effort by the schedule? Are you showing that you're completing things in that schedule? Can you show status updates to your schedule, that type of thing? And how often are you updating it? Is this like they built it at the beginning of the project and we're like 3/4 of the way through and it's never been touched? I would say that's not being regularly updated. They're going to want to know, they're going to want you to show that you are doing that. And this is really not, I mean, they're not trying to punish you or anything. These are the reason this is a best practice. If you're managing your schedule, you know, if you're just building a schedule for a pretty picture, you just will not have one. You need to use it to drive activity on the project. So we have what we call a PM Excellence program, and it has very specific things for what they have to do to maintain schedules, how they have to build them, what's the level of task, the maximum number of man hours that they can have in a task before we'll approve that schedule. So that's something to consider. Do we have a process for maintaining schedules? That's our PM Excellence program. And how do we reflect scope changes back into the schedule? So as you get a change order that affects potentially the end date of the project, but for sure the duration of a task, because it added more man hours, are you showing that reflected back into the schedule? And then is it used as part of your overall company resource planning process? So this one's a little harder depending on what level you're at with your resource planning tools. If you, like for us, we use, for all of this, the schedule is in our project server. The resource planning is done in project server. So everything revolves around the schedule, the actual schedule. And so it's pretty easy for us to show the tie to that. But it's not going to be that easy in some situations where you're using just an Excel spreadsheet to track what your resources are working on, and then you have an Excel spreadsheet or something, even a Microsoft project schedule standalone that you're tracking what your resources are working on day to day. So two keys that I remember as working through these, you know, make sure if you're building a schedule, it's not very good if it can never be modified. Just like your project plan, projects never go as planned. You need to make it so it's fairly easy to make changes without it being such a pain. I remember some of our early days, we just finally get so frustrated with the schedule, we just throw it away and start over. We just weren't building enough flexibility into the schedule. And then another key here is if it's not updated regularly, you really shouldn't go through the effort of building the schedule. It's not helping you. It needs to drive you to look at your project and what's really happening with it. Otherwise, schedule management is, you know, you're not getting the value from it if that's the case. Budget management, this is way different for a lot of companies as well. If there's, so, and I got a question just popped up on resource planning I'm going to answer before I go into budget. So do you feel resource planning process should be defined prior to developing the project schedule process? So good, that's actually a really good question. You need to define how you're going to track resources as well as how you're going to schedule your projects. You need to have a plan for both, but you do need to see what's my tie between the two. And as I stated, there's going to be a chance that the smaller the integrator, the less automated tie that's going to be between your two plans. So they work together, but you could start with your schedule and then do your resource plan, because oftentimes we build the schedule without actual named resources in it yet, and then we figure out who's available to work on it. So I think they have to work very tightly together, but they don't necessarily happen at exactly the same time. So I hope that answers the question. I think they do very definitely have to be considered together, but they can be done independent of one another. Just don't do one without looking at the other. Okay, thanks for the question. Budget management, is there evidence that the integrator manages their costs throughout the life cycle of the project? So they're going to want to see how are you managing? Are you pulling your job costing from an accounting system? How are you tracking your job cost? How's your PM know what it is? Does he have reports that he can pull that information from? Is it easy for him to get to? So right there, are there standard job cost reports, and are they available regularly? How often is that? Should it be more often? You know, if you do timesheets every week, they should get reports every week. If you do them every other week, they should get reports every other week for sure. But regularly is going to mean when your accounting system is updated with job costing information, reports should go out. Do they verify that they are charged accurately? This is, you know, the bigger your job, the harder this is, you know, especially in material, if you're charging materials against your job, because the PM doesn't necessarily, in fact, most cases in our company doesn't order those materials, but they still are responsible for, you know, for doing something with those materials and verifying did they charge properly to my job. And so they got to have ways to be able to do that. Do they know what corrective actions they need to take if the budgets aren't being met? So this is really just saying, I'm going over budget in my material budget. What's my corrective action? Maybe that I have no choice, but do they know what they need to do? Do I have to talk to someone about that, or do I figure out, you know, go talk to the engineer that ordered the material and make sure we ordered the right stuff? But do they have a, you know, a plan in place to figure out what's my corrective actions on this? And then do they address concerns during the project, not wait till the end? This is huge. I don't know how many times, you know, especially in startup on a project, where we say, we're just going to talk to them about that once we're done with the project. And you get done with startup, and they caused you to be on site for an extra 10 days, and they could care less that they kept you there for 10 extra days because you're already done now. So talking about changes, things that are happening, concerns with the budget, with your manager and your project team, as well as the customer, address them early when they're happening, not at the end of the job. It's awful tough to track things down if, you know, you're 6 months into your job and now I got to go tracking things down that nobody even remembers ordering. So the key really here that I've established, make sure you have timely reports that they can get to, and make sure they watch not just costs, but hours, man hours. And obviously those two have to balance, because if you have entry-level people working on your project, they obviously may take more hours to get it done, but their costs should be lower as well. But they are ultimately responsible to deliver the cost, because the cost is what the gross profit budget was based on the job. So have them monitoring both cost and hours, though. Change management is a little different. And everybody has a little different process here, but kind of the keys here, do you have good templates? Do you know how to communicate your changes to both the team and to the customer? What's your formal approval process look like? And are they reflected back into the project plan and your accounting processes? So did you get your change order documentation turned back into your accounting team so that they know they have to bill more and that you're expecting more cost on the job? So how are you doing with that? And really, again, the biggest piece here, make sure you got good templates. You know, have a scope change template that, you know, that they just fill in the blanks. When you're on startup, have a pad of paper with startup change requests that, you know, your operator's asking for a change on the HMI. How does that programmer ensure that their manager wants that change? Make them have a formal process for, you fill this form out, you get your boss to sign off on it, we'll estimate if it's going to cost anything to do it, and then we'll get it approved. But make sure you get the approvals before the work is done. And that's kind of tough to do in some cases, because sometimes the customers, yeah, I'll get that to you, and then you get to the end of the job and they never got that to you. So you got to balance that with customer relations, but your best practice is to certainly get that. Quality plan, another one of those that's, you know, still it's very important for a project. You want to make sure you've got a plan, and probably the biggest thing is, did you get it reviewed by the customer? One of the things you want to be sure of is that you relate what the quality that they're requiring on this job to what you're going to deliver. If you deliver the, you know, if you have a quality plan template that gives them the Cadillac version of quality, but they really only bought the Vega version, your project manager is going to spend more man hours doing it than what they were willing to pay for. Obviously, you're going to have a minimum level of quality that you want every team to perform, but if they're really saying, I don't care, I just need to get this system up and running and it needs to do these 5 things, you test those 5 things. Make sure that you're meeting those things. And get approval from the customer as to how you're going to prove quality to them through that test plan. You know, what am I planning to do to show that? All right, and then close out, and this is kind of the last phase of what they cover in this, and one that I still think it's probably the most overlooked and one of the biggest bangs for your buck. So is there a formal process for closing projects? Do you have a post-job review on every project, or projects of certain size and above? You know, do you have scorecards? Do you have surveys that you send out? You know, are you asking your client to participate in some way in your closure, whether that's just a survey that you send them or maybe even doing a client closeout meeting? Do you have documented lessons learned and a way to share those with the other project teams? And absolutely, I would say for many of the years that we have been audited, we just did not do well at sharing. We documented our lessons learned, but we were relearning lessons over and over again on different project teams. That one project team that learned it, no problem. They didn't ever have the issue with it again. But the team that did learn it, but that didn't get to learn it, had the same issue happen to them, and we just never did a good job of sharing it. So, you know, what is my formal process for closing out, getting these things documented? I suggest having a checklist that you go through. Here's my final closeout. Did I do all these things? Did I hand it off to whoever is going to support this project from here on out during the warranty period? Whatever your process is, making sure you've got a checklist. And it should include things like turnover documents to the client. Did I get those out to the client in a timely fashion? Those are ones that I've found our customers, if we don't get them out, that's one of the key dissatisfiers when we send our customer survey out to them, is if we didn't get their closeout documents out there in time. So I think, and I've mentioned this already really before, the key here, capture lessons learned and share them with all the teams. Find a way to put it, whether it's a wiki, you know, a SharePoint site, whatever it might be, find a way to capture it. Make sure it gets disseminated to all the teams. If you got to do it in a, you know, in a technical meeting where you just bring all your, you know, teams together, bring the leads from your teams together and say, guys, we found this out on this project. Everybody needs to know this, but make sure it's getting shared. And then make sure you got a good checklist that you can show, you are doing all your closeout processes, and then store that in your project folder or in the same location with when you archive this off or get rid of it off of your main server, you can go back to it and say, oh, that's right, we put that in this location. So just another one of those keys there. So I just thought, you know, just some general lessons learned. Get your entire PM team involved in building your processes and systems for the project management side of things here. In my first audit, I did all of this stuff, and I got to the audit, and we passed, but it was so painful because, you know, I had done things without them even being aware of all the processes that have been created, and some of them weren't being implemented very well. If you get them engaged, they're going to be implementing those processes much better. Just a huge lesson learned. That applies across all the sections of best practices. Make sure you've got established locations for all your PM deliverables to be stored. Today we actually created a cheat sheet for that. It's on every project SharePoint site. There's a hyperlink to that. If you click on it, it pulls up and it says, if you've got minutes from your kickoff meeting, here's the spot they need to be stored. And so when the auditor, the last time we were audited, every one of those documents was actually in the location that we said they were going to be. We showed them, here's where they're supposed to be. We went to 3 or 4 different job folders, and they were all there. So I just had one question. We actually use Exotech for our CSIA audits. We've used them since, you know, they were the only auditor back when we first started getting audited. We've stayed with them, done a very nice job for us. I can't comment on ASR, and I think there's actually another auditor for those that are from like Australia area, another auditor now in Australia. But that's one that we certainly have gotten some very good information from. Every audit, we learn a lot more about things that we can do better, and that's one of the things I like about going through the auditing process. So, and in every section, but particularly in the PM section, you need to read and implement much more than just the audited items that are shown. You know, the little things with the magnifying glasses. If you just focus on the things with the magnifying glasses, there's a very good chance you won't get a high enough score to pass in project management your first round, because they all tie together so much. And then what we've done, and this has been very helpful for us, we set up random audits on just PM processes to verify that they're following the process. So once a quarter, every PM gets an audit, and it's a random audit, so they may have 5 projects that they're working on, and we will audit one of their projects, but when they come into the room, they don't know what project it is that we're going to audit. And then we go through every one of the PM processes that we've laid out in what we call our PM Excellence program, and they have to answer all of our questions, and we'll go look at documents just like you would if you were getting audited by the CSIA auditor. Been a very useful process, and we've, even from our PM's perspective, they appreciate it because they see the value in that this audit is helping me to make sure I'm delivering my projects better. So that's really the presentation. I was just going to check real quick and see if there were any in my nope, all the questions that are in the chat box right now have been answered. Okay, so the question just came in, is one audit a quarter good enough for Exotech? Absolutely. You could do one audit. You could just audit annually even, as long as you're doing something to check the process. In fact, if they're doing their job and you're only just randomly auditing every now and then, the real deal is, are they doing their job? So if you're getting good scores on that they've actually done what they said they were going to do, you're not going to have any trouble with passing this section. Okay, let's see. Can you comment on the percent of cost of project management? I would say that we spend, we kind of budget about 10% of the project's man hours. 10% of the overall budget, man-hour budget, is going to be project management time. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes it's plenty. Depends on how complicated the project is. You know, if you've got to do a really complicated functional requirements spec up front, the PM is setting up a lot of meetings and spending a lot of time in design meetings, and that's a little bit different there. But I would say that's kind of at the spot where I've seen a lot of other integrators as well, as about 10% of the project management, of the overall man hours of the project become project management. The one question, we have difficulties to use project templates with clients who give us a lot of little PO, and each PO has a related little bit of activity, and it's a big effort to do that. Very good point. One of the deals that you will find, and you need to have a project methodology for small projects and one for your larger projects, because you will trim down what you're requiring the PM to do on smaller projects. And so if you're one of those companies that does almost all small projects, I think you're going to have a very trimmed down version of your project methodology, and most of it's going to be there. Your templates are going to be simpler templates as well. That's one of the things that we actually, our methodology looks very similar, but inside the items of our methodology, we will tell them, you know, this, you know, like our pre-design meeting and our high-level design meeting typically get combined into a single meeting. So that's things that we do. Our templates, we may do a lot less formal documents. Our status reports are going to be very small amounts of items in our status reports, and you kind of work that with the customer because they're definitely not willing to pay for a ton of project management time on these smaller ones. Your big deal, just make sure that you're getting done what makes the most sense for you. Even if the customer will not pay for it, if it means that you're going to have a bad project because you don't do it, you need to do it. And this is where I see the most value in project management. You will have your projects run, our net income or our gross profit off of projects since we implemented our project management office continues to grow, and mainly because we're managing scope and risk so much better, and it's just such a formal process now. So I would suggest you're going to need to set, these are minimum requirements. Every job is going to have these minimum requirements as a project system, project management piece, process. But then on small projects, you will have things that are not required. But just think of them in two different terms like that, small and medium and maybe some larger size projects. But ours, the way we do it is small and large, small and other is everything else. Good questions, though. Any others? Any other questions? If not, I really appreciate you joining today. This was, I have very much a passion with project management, as you can tell with how I present on this topic. Hopefully it's been useful to you and you can take a few things home. And I will leave also in this deck, I'll leave my contact information, and feel free to give me a call, send me an email. I'd be glad to talk through some sections with you if you've got additional questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for your contribution of time and expertise today. Your presentation was extremely insightful. I thought that was great.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, and we look forward to seeing you on other webinar series in the future. I know you've been a host in the past, and we do appreciate it.
You bet.
Again, we want to thank our hostess, Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. And we ask that everyone complete the survey for today's webinar. You will be directed to it automatically at the end of the webinar, and it only takes about 30 seconds to complete. Your feedback helps us continually improve these presentations for both CSIA and our presenter. In closing, there's a list of 2 important other considerations. Cybersecurity incidents have a dramatic impact on industrial control systems, and system integrators can play a crucial role in securing end-user systems against such risks and in the process develop a valuable business opportunity. One last thing on the survey, if you guys have any other suggested topics for future webinars, please be sure to include it in the survey comments. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
And I have stopped the recording.
All right.